Well, welcome everybody. My name is Yeshit Chappell, and Patty and I are part of the Shantideva programming team, and so are hosting this meeting. And we're very happy to welcome this morning Venerable Thubten Wangdu. Um, he, as he was just saying, is on holiday from his studies as a in a intensive translation program at Lotsawa Rinchen Zangpo translator program in Dharamsala, and he has completed the 5-year FPMT basic program, and after that, he took ordination with Lama Zopa in 2022, which must have been one of the last ordinations that Lama Zopa conferred. So
That's
a
right.
great honor. And
Yeah.
uh, and then for 2.5 years, he was the resident teacher at Tushita. And so we're very happy to welcome. This is his first contact with the Shantideva Center in New York, and we hope it will be the first of many. So with that, welcome, Venerable, and floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me today to give a brief talk to Shantideva Center. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. And yeah, I want to thank you all, especially the team of Shantideva, for inviting me and putting everything together so nicely so that we can have a brief Dharma chat on Sunday morning, spending some time to look at the Buddha's teaching and see if there's something useful for us here, something we might want to work with, something we might find inspiring, something that might help us to gain greater insight into how the mind works and to gain greater clarity with respect to some aspects of perception. And to that, learning a few practical tools that we can use to develop more positive qualities of the mind, more wholesome qualities of the mind, which in turn will help us to have more happiness and inner confidence in our day-to-day lives, which we can then share with others. So this is why we're here today. This can be, our motivation for this talk. This talk has the title Seeing Clearly, Perception Without Projection. How can we as human beings perceive things more clearly, right? How can we see things more as they actually are without always projecting our own personal interpretations onto things, without always having to cast our own expectations or conceptualizations onto things, our own habitual thought patterns, which often leads to quite unnecessary forms of suffering and frustration in our lives. How can we avoid that a bit and instead develop a clearer, more unbiased view, so to say, more realistic views of things? You know? And through this, be more mindful and in contact with how things actually are, the very basic nature of things, the basic reality of things, which, when understood correctly, according to the Buddha, right, will allow us to live much more happily, much more relaxedly, which will allow us to have a much greater experience of well-being and joy and confidence in our day-to-day lives, if we see things clearly. And all of that, obviously, in Buddhism has to do with, it begins with perception, right? How we perceive things. How do we look at things? How do we apprehend things? How do we interpret things? And then, in turn, how do we act on our own interpretations of things, right? It all starts with perception itself. Perception, the mind, really is the starting point of all of that, and the role that the mind and perception plays in the cultivation of well-being. So this is a little bit our topic for today. See how it goes. So as students of the Buddha Dharma, I think that most of you are well aware of the basic Buddhist teaching that the suffering and unhappiness we experience in our lives the suffering and unhappiness which we don't want, yet nonetheless often have to experience, it has its root cause in misperception. We have all heard how not seeing things clearly, misperceiving things, is the main troublemaker in our life, actually. That is our own misknowing ignorance, as the Buddha called it, which is mainly responsible for our reoccurring experiences of dissatisfaction and suffering. Although we all want to experience happiness, we all want to have well-being, to thrive, to flourish as human beings, although we all want to be kind and loving and connected with others and be open and inspired and active and well, right? Although we really wish for that deep down, often without control, we are bound to experience confusion, painful emotions, disappointment, dissatisfaction over and over again. And we usually tend to conclude, well, that is probably because there must be something wrong with the situation around me, right? Must be something wrong with something over there, that this here is not yet ideally calibrated. Something over here needs to be changed around a bit for me to be more happy, right? If the situation with my partner would be better, maybe if I were to live in a different place with a different person, if only my relative wasn't sick, if only she wouldn't act in this way, and so forth. We come up with all kinds of reasons, right? And explanations for why we feel unhappy at the moment. And we keep looking around ourselves for what we can change around us in order to lastingly feel better, to find a solution to our problems, isn't it? And it rarely, if ever, crosses our minds to, instead of this, looking around ourselves, start to look inside, into our minds, to change something within in order to find the solution to our problems. To change the mind, our perspective, our ways of looking at things, our own views, to solve our problems. Yet this is really exactly what the Buddha advises us to do. That fundamentally the solution to our problems as human beings is only to be found by way of working with our minds, really, by way of subduing the mind, transforming, developing the mind, overcoming our own afflictive mental states of mind, such as attachment and anger, which arise from self-grasping ignorance, as well as self-cherishing, self-centeredness, isn't it? So, what happens in our minds, how we think, how we apprehend the world from here, that is the main player when it comes to finding solutions to problems. That is the main game changer, really, when it comes to wanting to be a happy, fulfilled, flourishing, thriving human being and to diminish and eventually overcome suffering. Of course, if we are able to change external situations as well, by all means, we should do so, right? If we are able to diminish suffering by changing an external situation, of course, we should do that. Do our best to bring happiness and freedom from suffering into the world, to others as well as ourselves. However, as we all know from our own experience, sometimes no matter how much we try to control the external world, there will always come some situation which we are not able to change to our liking, no matter how hard we try, isn't it? And if we cannot change an outer situation, there is only one option left. We have to change the mind. Right? And this is very, very effective. And I'm sure that many of you know from your own experience that this is effective. And you have done that already, right? I mean, we know if we think about it, it doesn't take too much to see that actually the main factor which will determine whether a particular situation in your life is a problem or not, it's not so much the situation itself, but it is your own way of how you apprehend the situation, which determines that. If you think about a particular challenging situation in your life right now, you can acknowledge that, okay, if I look at this situation in an unskillful way, with judgment in the mind, with rejection in the mind, with anger, with impatience, with my own personal projections and expectations, right? In other words, with afflictive emotions being present in the mind, then the situation will indeed appear back to you as a real problem, very concrete, right? And we ourselves will get all tight and narrow and caught up and very easily agitated, won't we? And the situation indeed becomes a condition for a lot of continuous frustration and suffering in our lives. Yet, if we manage to look at the same situation in a more skillful manner, with understanding, patience, kindness to self and others, a long-term perspective, compassion, tolerance, wisdom, meaning with positive, wholesome qualities present in the mind, then the same situation, although still challenging, will appear to us completely differently. It can appear to us as an opportunity rather than a problem. An opportunity for inner development, for personal, spiritual, inner growth. The situation becomes an opportunity for me to help, to support, to accomplish something useful for self and others, right? It can also be perceived in that way. And therefore, the same situation suddenly becomes very beneficial, very positive, very worthwhile. So much so that in the future, we might look back at the situation and think, wow, if I would not have experienced that challenging situation, I would not have become the person that I am now, isn't it? And rather than having this inherently horrible problem out there, which we want to get rid of as quickly as possible, we can use it. We take it onto the path, they say, in terms of Lojong, right? Mind training. So, what is the determining factor for that? It is your own apprehension of the situation, which determines how you experience the situation. It begins with the mind again, with perception, right? This being the point. So, how we think, how we apprehend something, our perception becomes the very source, indeed, for how we experience a particular thing or situation, in fact. And if we change our minds, what we perceive in turn will also change accordingly, interestingly. And this is not just it's not just a superficial thing like, it's not just, well, if you look at it from over here, it looks a bit different, although it's still the same thing. Actually, the situation is really bad. But if you look from it from here, you can also see some good things. It actually goes a bit deeper than that. You know? This is actually something which goes all the way down into the fundamentals of the Buddha's worldview, without having to go deep into discussing Prasangika Madhyamika philosophy, we can see that the basic Buddhist view is that mind is the forerunner of all experience. The Buddha said, right? Mind is the forerunner of all experience. The Buddha himself said in the very first verses of the Dhammapada, the experience of life is created by mind. Thought precedes experience. If one speaks and acts with a clouded mind, suffering follows. If one speaks and acts with a clear mind, contentment follows, like a faithful shadow, something like that, right? So the role of the mind is primary. The power of the mind is incredibly important for us to acknowledge, to discover. And the Buddha then teaches, right, that the most fundamental reason for why we have various forms of suffering experiences in our lives in the first place is because we have this fundamental habit, we have these imprints in the mind that cause us to perceive things in unskillful, mistaken ways. Right? We do not realize things the way they actually are. This is our main problem. Right? Clouded by ignorance. Things appear to us in a particular way, but actually, once we begin to analyze, they do not exist in that way at all. But us believing the wrong appearances, we get caught up in a net of grasping, starting to identify ourselves with things in mistaken ways. And this whole dualistic deal of a truly existent self over here, being totally separate from others, there's looking into a truly existent world out there, all of that begins with this cognitive mistake we have in the mind, self-grasping ignorance, grasping at inherent existence, Buddha said, right? And based on this, we create all these unrealistic views and expectations and exaggerations, attachment and anger and jealousy and pride. And from that, we act upon these mistaken views in confused ways. We harm others or we grasp to get what we want, and push away what we don't want. And this whole shabang, this karmic shabang unfolds, which keeps us in samsara, reoccurring dissatisfactory experiences, right? It all begins with misperception again, right? I mean, the Buddha explained this in great lengths, right? How all this works. The Buddha laid it out so clearly. It's so remarkable, you know, when we study the Buddha Dharma a little bit more deeply. He laid it out exactly clearly. Okay, how do we misperceive things? How does suffering or delusions arise from that? How karma is created from that? How suffering arises from that? And how we can reverse this process by achieving liberation, right? By overcoming wrong modes of thought, wrong actions, and so forth. Isn't it remarkable? For example, right now in the moment, next to a Lotsawa translation program, which I do, I also study in the Tibetan library. Every morning I have a class at 9 o'clock, Buddhist philosophy with Geshe Gyaltsen. And we were just going through a wonderful text by Gen Lama Rinpa over the four seals, the Buddha teaching the four seals, where the Buddha showed very clearly how our misperceptions lead to suffering, right? The four seals. Number one, although all compounded phenomena are impermanent, transient, not enduring, but always changing, disintegrating, disappearing, actually. Although that is the case, we perceive them wrongly as lasting, stable, and permanent. And we start to identify ourselves with things. This is what we do. We start to identify with something which is actually changing and impermanent to be lasting and stable, and we think, I. And we develop these expectations with attachment. Although all contaminated phenomena in samsara are unsatisfactory, number two, we hold on to them as being perfectly wonderful and pure and satisfactory. All these things, right? We start to cling, we start to identify ourselves with them, developing expectations with attachment again. Although in reality, all phenomena are selfless and empty. All phenomena being merely dependently arisen circumstances, relying on ever-changing conditions. We grasp at an inherent I and mine. We hold on to real me, real others, real phenomena. Again, developing strong identifications. I, giving rise to strong expectations and hopes with attachment. All of which leads to suffering. So, based on these misperceptions, right, these misidentifications of that which is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and selfless, in reality, to be permanent, satisfactory, and having self, with attachment, we keep creating and recreating all kinds of conceptual stories and opinions of I and mine and she and him and them. You know, we continuously fabricate all kinds of concepts and ideas and expectations solid in the mind. And through that come all kinds of fears and worries and insecurities about I. And although we think that we are seeing things as they are, in fact, we are totally living our lives in our own projections of the world. Completely believing in a world, 100%, that is not actually there the way it appears. While at the same time, we are totally unaware that this is the case. I mean, that's ignorance, right? This is ignorance at work. And we keep being restless and insecure and confused and anxious. We suffer due to ignorance and attachment, keeping us trapped in samsara. Again, misperception is responsible for this at the root, at the core of it. So the Buddha identified at the moment sentient beings suffer, in fact, unnecessarily due to a cognitive mistake. The Buddha didn't say sentient beings suffer because others are harming them, or you know what I mean? He didn't put the cause for suffering outside. Outside conditions for suffering exist, right? I mean, I'm not saying everything's fine, it's just your mind that is the problem. Actually, we can even, one could argue in this way, but the Buddha says, yes, there's conditions for suffering, but the main cause for suffering, the main root is in the mind, and also the main root for bliss and perfect happiness and liberation and full enlightenment also is not to be found somewhere outside. We don't have to bargain for it or look for it somewhere in Alaska or in Tibet or anywhere, but we can find it and create it, cultivate it in the mind. Buddha nature is already within us right now in here. It's just a matter of discovering it, developing it, depends on what kind of mode of Buddhist thought you follow. So it is based on this cognitive mistake we have at the moment. Due to that, we keep creating and recreating wrong modes of thought based on misidentifications, conceiving things wrongly, conceiving things in ways in which they are not really existing. So, yeah, perception is a big deal. Is a bit my point, right? It's a big deal. It is the main deal. Now, if we are able to recognize this, if we're able to recognize and accept that, okay, the root of suffering lies within misperception, that is the main troublemaker, we can then begin, we can start to work. We can begin to correct our misperceptions. That's the good news. We can begin to work with more skillful ways of thinking, skillful ways of understanding the world, diminishing our delusions, harmful states of mind, such as grasping attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, which lead to continuous confusion and problems, through the right method, through the active development of positive, wholesome state of minds, the antidote to afflictions, such as wisdom, insight, mindfulness, introspection, seeing things clearly, kindness, compassion, love, rejoicing, and so forth, right? The six perfections. We can free ourselves from misperception and misknowing. That is the case. That's the possibility. And with this, then, suffering experiences will naturally, automatically begin to diminish more and more in the mind until they eventually will be completely exhausted, totally overcome. And gradually more and more space for genuine, lasting well-being and happiness will be developed. Nirvana, liberation, full enlightenment will be achieved for ourselves and others. Something like that. This is the Buddha's teaching, right? I mean, in a nutshell. It's just a short introduction to what we're talking about here. Think about that. Now, when we ask the question, all right, so how can I do this? Well, the answer to that question is the whole Buddhist path, right? The 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, right? Against our 84,000 types of afflictions, which luckily the great Lama Atisha, the great Indian scholar yogi Lama Atisha, who went to Tibet, has written this text of the Lamp to the Path to Enlightenment, kind of structuring the Buddha's teaching in what is called the Lamrim, the graduated stage on the path to enlightenment. When we start to reflect on them correctly and then, based on correct devotion to the virtuous friend and all the three scopes, the three higher trainings, the three principal aspects of the path, together with the Vajrayana, all of this is the complete unmistaken path to full enlightenment. But it's quite a lot to talk about. Sunday morning, New York City. So, today I just want to talk about one very little beautiful instruction that the Buddha gave, which shows us how we can, in a very practical, day-to-day way, effectively begin to untangle ourselves a bit from being all too caught up in misidentification and wrong projections, with which in our daily life we are able to mindfully make a difference between perception and projection, so to say. And in turn, through that, we are able to avoid a lot of unnecessary involvement in emotional complications and confusion. How? By simply paying attention, seeing things more clearly as they are by simply paying attention, which is what I would like to touch upon in this brief session this morning. This brief instruction that the Buddha gave, in that he talks about perception. And he says, whenever you see something in the scene, let there just be the scene. Whenever you hear something in the herd, let there just be the herd. When you feel something, you sense something in the sensed, let there only be the sensed. When you cognize something in the cognized, let there only be the cognized. Which is to say, train yourself to attend to whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you feel, whatever you cognize. Attend to that without any conceptual overlay, without adding on any likes or dislikes to what you experience, without starting any stories, without starting any projections or expectations, without even thinking about what you experience. But instead, just see, just hear, just feel, just observe and watch and pay attention. In this way, whenever you experience something, you consciously create some space between your initial experience of the thing and how the mind interprets it. You see that a bit? Creating some space between that which comes in through your senses, right? Your sense doors, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, or the body conscious senses, right? Whatever comes in through that from the external world, and your mental consciousness processing that. You make some space between these two in this practice. And this is very important, you see, because usually we are so quick in making all kinds of decisions in the mind immediately after we experience something, right? You experience something, let's say you see something and you say, ah, this is this, ah, this is that. This I like, this I don't like. Oh, this is really good. Oh, this is bad. Oh, this will benefit me, this will harm me, right? This is ridiculous. This is so great. Right? We immediately start to act and react in the shortest moment of time. Our mind is so quick, right? We decide to follow after this and push away that. And through this, we often unwantingly, unwillingly get ourselves into all kinds of trouble because we take a momentary situation, a momentary impression, a momentary sense input, which is present only for a short moment of time. We take it totally seriously and get emotionally caught up in it. It happens so fast, doesn't it? It's such a habit. Something comes, somebody says something to you, and you kind of get emotionally caught up in it, And although the moment is long past, the same evening you go to bed and you think, how dare this person say that to me? Why did this person say that to me? You turn it over in your mind over and over and over again. You take it with you through your sleep into your dreams, and you wake up with the thought, why did that person say that to me? And you take it to the next day. And it is very, very possible that we live days and weeks and months and years, even decades, up to our whole life, contemplating and turning around in our mind a thing that one person said one time, sorry, in one moment. Isn't that incredible? Out of control, unmindfully, we act and react and overreact because we are pulled into this habit of, into this emotional projection, so to say. Now, here in this instruction of the Buddha, we consciously take time to train ourselves to be with the most simple, most bare function of perception itself, without any projection. We consciously make the decision to practice without the need to interpret anything we experience, but just to experience things as they appear right now, as they are, without any judgment or categorization, without any add-ons, without any upgrades, without any updates, no wish to change it even, just what is. In the scene, let there just be the scene. If we do this, this can lead to a very powerful insight into the nature of things and what happens in our minds. When we practice this continuously, sometimes, we can clearly see how we experience something and how immediately the mind constantly interprets it and judges it, what happens. And we can also see eventually that this constant judgment and overinterpretation of experience is actually simply not necessary. It's just a habit. We don't have to do this. It's like, whoa, I don't have to do this. It's like you yourself giving yourself freedom from your own personal interpretation of things, which actually are so exhausting, aren't they? This constant judgment and interpretation of things is so draining. It takes so much energy. I often feel like how wonderful it would be, if my mind would be free of judgment. That would be so great. Doesn't mean that you become completely indifferent and cannot judge between what is right and wrong and positive and harmful. It's not that, but it's this kind of, the emotional, self-cherishing, self-grasping judgment of, this person again saying this stupid thing again. Of course, she doesn't know. She never knew. Like that kind of. How wonderful it would be if this would just be, if we could overcome that. So this instruction of the Buddha, this practice, which I also want to meditate on in some time to put it into practice immediately, is something extremely powerful. So, for example, you know, if you, for a moment, simply take the experience of seeing itself, okay? Just the bare experience of eye consciousness perceiving visual form. For example, if you have a cup on your table, right, next to your laptop or your iPhone or whatever device you're watching this talk on. No, it's Sunday morning in New York. Probably 9 o'clock, you need a cup of coffee. It's very important for a Dharma talk in the morning. So if you have a cup of coffee, that's very good. If not, please do not stand up to make a cup of coffee now, because we're in the middle of a thought experiment here. You have to look at something else. Okay. Whatever object you have, look at it. You look at your cup. Okay. Eye consciousness looking at cup. What does it do? Eye consciousness looking at cup simply perceives shape and color. That's all it does. Eye consciousness merely perceives shape and color. This is the object of perception of I consciousness, and nothing more, nothing else. Think about it. This is what appears, right? Shape and color. This is what a main mind does. A main mind. For those of you who have studied a little bit Logic, mind and awareness, you know that when we say main mind, we refer to a type of consciousness which refers or which observes the raw primary characteristic of an object, a thing. It refers to the very basic knowing of an object itself. This is what a main mind does. A main mind is defined as a knower, a consciousness which apprehends the very entity of the object, the thing itself. And all our sense consciousnesses, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, and sense body consciousness, together with the sixth, the mental consciousness, are considered to be main minds in the sense that they simply apprehend the entity of the object without fiddling around with it, without interpreting it. You know, all of these other things is the job of the mental factors, right? The main minds perceiving the entity of an object, and its retinue has mental factors like feeling, the experience of pleasant or unpleasant, or discrimination, or intention, or attention, right? We have the five omnipresent mental factors and object ascertaining mental factors and the virtuous mental factors and the afflictions and all of the retinue there. But the main mind, such as just an eye consciousness, does nothing particular but just perceives its object, shape and color. So to focus on this, you see, it's really interesting to contemplate this a bit. This main function of eye consciousness, just perceiving shape and color, nothing more. And of course, after that, very quickly, as I've been saying, all the interpretations come along and think, oh yeah, my cup. Ah, it's a great cup. I really like my cup. I got this cup from my boyfriend last year in Valentine's Day. It was so romantic when he gave me the cup, right? This year he didn't give me a cup actually at Valentine's Day, you know, and the mind gets all distracted in all kinds of stories and add-ons, you know. The mental factors doing their thing. But you see, the main job of eye consciousness simply sees shape and color of cup. So I find it very helpful, you know, to recognize and contemplate this, especially, for example, in your daily life when you see something attractive, right? When an object of attachment appears in your field of vision, right? If you are mindful, remember this instruction and catch yourself for a moment, simply contemplating, just shapes and colors floating by. Nothing more. Just shapes and colors moving. Usually what immediately happens is we see something attractive and we think, I really like this. This fits well to me. I want this to be closer to me. I want to make it mine. We immediately identify. An immediate identification process is put into place. And we are, again, involuntarily, with no freedom actually, pulled into craving. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? How one particular shape can cause your mind to go completely berserk, if you think about it. I mean, isn't it really weird? You know, you walk in the street, you see a person walking by in a particular shape, and the mind is sucked onto the object, so to say. Right? It's just a shape. Or you see the shape of a human face. Just imagine, if you look at my face, the shape of my face, if you know, our standards of beauty are so interesting also. If this eye here would just be down here, and suddenly it's a bit like, oh, a weird shape, right? And find it a bit strange, right? Or the nose, right? The nose is just over there, and the ear is here, where the nose is like we get very confused and unsettled, and is but you know the interpretations are very attachment doesn't really arise so much, right? Because the shape is not in accordance with our karmic kind of configuration of what we human beings like. It's just shape and color, right? Same when you find something unattractive, we think, I don't like it. It looks weird. Has an ear here. I don't like it. I don't want to have it close to me. I don't want to have it near me. If you see something, the mind adds on to it. For example, if you are in a retreat, or you work in a Dharma center, or you are in a particular meditation retreat, and there's a person that you don't like, a person that you have problems with and that you just don't like, merely seeing that person's shoes in front of the meditation hall, you feel like, the aversion is coming up. Just seeing shape and color of their shoes. Like, oh my God, he's in there. It's just shape and color. It might just to stay there. When in such a situation in our life, it's just to experiment with that. If you are able to remember and just switch your attention to this instruction in the scene, let there just be the scene. You just tell yourself in your mind, like, these Lojong slogans that you have in the 7 point mind training. You have towards the end, you have all these kind of mental recall slogans that you just say that you memorize these slogans in an appropriate situation. You just tell them to yourself in your mind to kind of be mindful again of what you've learned, what you've studied, what you've understood to be correct and to practice. You just say shape and color, just something that is seen. It's very effective. Just remember, and it kind of pulls you out of going into stories, that instruction. You kind of suddenly, for a moment at least, no real ground for an affliction to arise is present. Because for a moment, there is no real identification with what you see. You just see. You see? Huh? Right? Because as soon as you identify with something, there is kind of a wanting there. There's kind of a wanting there. And if there is a wanting there is also a potential problem there. Lama Yeshe said that. Lama Yeshe said, the reason why we have a problem with a person is because we want something from that person. If I have a problem with you, it's because I want something from you. If I don't want anything from you, I don't have a problem with you. Hmm. And then there is space. There is kind of a peace and some freedom to breathe, to move, to make a decision that is more meaningful, to create a cause that has a more virtuous effect, to pull ourselves out from the habit of immediate reaction towards some impulse by just telling yourself, hey, just shape and color. In the herd, let there just be the herd. When you hear something with your ear consciousness just perceives sound. That's it. There is just the bare experience of sound, different forms of change and transformation happening in the auditory field. That's what it is. It's very powerful. The next time somebody criticizes you or says something nasty to you, you know, if you can then and there remember this instruction, oh, just sound hitting my eardrum. And all the interpretations that come with it, how dare she say something like that to me, kind of, it just doesn't arise. You give away its breeding ground by not going to that identification. Her saying that to me. You just stay with the remembrance, Sound, impermanent, changing, not staying the same for even a second, having arisen and having already passed. Sound is so quick, right? With sound, is I think is also one reason why, when you study debate, logic and debate, and in the collected topics and in the Brahmanavatika and in these ancient texts where they have these syllogisms. The most famous syllogism in logic is sound. It follows its impermanent because it's a product. Why is sound used in these situations? Because sound is quite easy to recognize how it is just arises and passes. Right? It's impermanent. Right? It's easier to recognize that sound is impermanent than that my cup is impermanent, but that's just by the side. So, sound, just sound. When somebody criticizes you, no identification. It's a bit like when somebody scolds you or shouts at you in a language that you don't understand. Did you ever have that experience? You know, I know you're in Italy or I don't know, in South America, if you don't speak Spanish or whatever it is, you're in Italy and you walk by the side of the road and one person comes, it's, and you're like, you know there's a problem, something is wrong. You get that, right? Something is not quite right. She's really upset, but you don't really know what it is. And you notice she's using some really harsh words there. But somehow it doesn't really hit the ego, isn't it? Somehow it's just sound. And it's rather comical. It's rather funny because it's like, I'm sorry, lady, I don't know what you're saying. How can I help you? It's a bit like that feeling, just sound. Imagine you can do that, although you do understand the language. you know? Or also another good opportunity to practice this is when somebody says your name, for example. That's also good. Name is so strong, of course, with identification, isn't it? You know? Somebody says Wangdu, and I'm like, yes, I. Yeah, immediately, so quick. But it's just sound. Wangdu. Before I was ordained as a monk, I had a different name. And you can say Wangdu as much as you like. There's no identification. It's just sound. Somebody else's name. But now it's my name. And that particular sound has an emotional impact. Of course, that sound is also useful. And it's also useful to see something to actually be a cup, shape and color, yes, but it also holds my coffee. I can use it for that, of course. But in this practice, it's just to break it down a bit in order to create this gap. You see that a bit? To not be in the identification is extremely helpful because we over identify. And the same goes for other sense impressions, such as smells and tastes, right? And touch and so forth. In the sensed, let there just be the sensed. If you taste something really, really good, it's like, well, it's just taste. No need to get all crazy about it. If you taste something not so good, it's just taste. Right? It's not a big deal. So, you see, through this very simple instruction, we kind of, for a moment, pull out the rug from below our afflictions. It is simple, but also a very effective instruction to not give rise to immediate misidentifications and afflictions, to not give them a ground to grow. We train ourselves in the discipline of simple, bare awareness. The object just appears for a moment at the sense door, and you as a subject just hear it, see it, sense it for a moment. That's it. Something new appears at the sense door. You are aware. Changes. It arises and passes. In this way, you train yourself not to think in terms of what you see, not to start imagining or interpreting it, which leads to a basic non-identification with what is seen. So we don't say, I see this. We don't say, This is my experience. It's an important one. My experience. No, no. It's just experience. Can't let the I out of there. You don't claim ownership over your own happy experiences nor suffering experiences. Can you imagine the freedom? Suffering arises, yes, but it's not mine. I experience it, yeah, but it does not belong to me. You see? I mean, it's just a, we don't say, oh, I see this, so therefore this means this and that, mentally adding on to it. No, we just dwell in the basic understanding, the basic insight. This is not I. This is not self. It's just a happening. This is not mine. It does not belong to me. You do not project I onto what is experienced. You just experience. And it seems to me that the whole point of the Buddha's teaching is to overcome what? Self-grasping, which is the root of samsara. And to then, with compassion, lead other living beings to overcome self-grasping and embrace dependent arising with compassion, wisdom and compassion, isn't it? So the thing is, if there is no strong feeling of a concrete I and mine, then attachment and anger and jealousy and pride and envy and all these disturbing emotions, which usually grow like from the root of self-grasping like a tree, they, they're all arising based on a strong sense of a concrete I. If the sense of I is not there, then they don't have a building block to arise and they don't come. And therefore, one does not experience suffering from them. I think His Holiness the Dalai Lama said one time, a few times, if you remember emptiness 16 times a day, it seems like afflictions don't really come up, he said. It seems like afflictions don't really arise. If you keep remembering the ultimate nature of things, lack of inherent existence, the ultimate nature of the I, lack of inherent existence. And here it is just, we don't even go there, right? We just say, I have an experience, no identification with the experience. In the scene, let there just be the scene. And then this practice can be done also, I mean, first of all, with the objects of the senses, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, objects of touch, right? But also it can be done with whatever happens in your mind, meaning in the domain of mental consciousness. We can do the same thing with thoughts, emotions, memories, mental imagery, fantasies, expectations, hopes, fears. Whatever mental event arises within the space of your mind, with mindfulness and introspection, one simply cognizes what is arising without thinking I, without thinking mine, without the need to follow it, add on to it, interpret it, or asking, why is it there? One is simply aware. And in what happens in the mind, let there just be what happens in the mind. This would be it. So let's practice this. Are you okay with having a brief meditation on exactly this subject, what I've been just talking about? I've been talking for almost an hour already. It's 1.5 hours, we said, no, Yeshila? So maybe we have a short.
Yes, yes, 90 minutes. So I think
Okay,
we
great.
could go to a meditation, and we don't usually take breaks in a 90-minute session.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's do a brief meditation on this, and maybe we then also have maybe a couple of minutes to also have some discussion or some questions on what we talked about. All right? Great. So in this meditation now, after taking some time to calm the mind a little bit with a minute or two on mindfulness of breathing, just to get our mind into meditation mood, we will take some time to pay attention, bear attention to our five sense consciousnesses. We will take some time to first discover a little bit the direct experience of each of our five sense consciousnesses, such as seeing and hearing and so forth. And we will mindfully observe whatever sensual input that we receive through these doors of our senses, simply watching that for a while with bare attention. And then after that, having been with our sense consciousnesses, we will turn our attention from that to observing the experience of mental consciousness itself, observing our thoughts, our emotions, whatever arises in the space of the mind itself, and taking these mental events themselves as our object of attention, watching them with a sense of ease and non identification, with moment to moment bare awareness. So, in this way, we train ourselves in bare attention, in non judgment, non interpretation, by simply paying attention. So, finding yourself a nice and comfortable posture with the way you sit on your chair or on your cushion, taking some time to settle into a position that is comfortable for you, just having your back straight, the chest open, relaxing your shoulders and neck, and being at ease, starting with an upright body and a relaxed state of mind. If you want, you can take 3 slow, deep breaths all the way down into the abdomen, just to, with every in breath, centering your mind, with the out breath, releasing any tightness, any tension, relaxing deeply with every out breath, becoming easy, simple, with 3 breaths. And then slowly, as we allow the breath to settle into a natural rhythm, breathing effortlessly, we simply place our attention on the natural ongoing movement of the breath for a little while, allowing the breath to breathe, to flow by itself, and just noticing the ongoing movement of the breath and whatever sensations arise in the body with the breathing, just placing our attention on the incoming and outgoing of the breath, just for a minute or two, to relax the mind and become attentive. And then, with this, we can begin to practice the Buddha's instruction while we remain in this quiet mode of attention, while you remain in this quiet mode of mindfulness. You can gently let go of single-pointedly observing your breathing. And for a moment, just open your eyes and let your gaze rest in the space in front of you on the ground, as if you were daydreaming, but being very attentive. Just allow your gaze to rest very softly and simply bring your attention to the visual field that you experience with eye consciousness. This field of shapes and colors which naturally appears to you. And for some time, pay attention very closely to simply this experience of seeing itself. And in the scene, let there just be the scene, which is to say, attend to whatever you see without any conceptual overlay. But for 1 minute, just see. Then you can slowly close your eyes again and redirect your attention to whatever sounds you hear. Focus your attention on the domain of experience of sound, the auditory field. And again, without projecting any mental images on what you hear, without adding on any stories on what you hear, with bare, naked attention. In the herd, let there just be the herd. Now, from that, slowly redirect your attention back to the field of your body, the field of tactile physical sensations. And once again, without having to visualize the body or projecting any concepts or labels or images onto this physical field of the body, for a minute, just feel the body. Just sense the body. And in the sensed, let there just be the sensed. And then from that, you can briefly note whether you can detect also any smells or fragrances with your nose consciousness. Or maybe you can experience a particular taste with your tongue consciousness. Now, with this, we've just completed a brief tour through our 5 physical sense experiences. Now, from this, observe very closely and see if there is anything else that you immediately experience right now in this moment. Something that is apart from your 5 sense impressions that you still immediately experience right now. What is there? Aren't you aware of thoughts arising in the mind, mental imagery, fantasies, or maybe mental conversation taking place in the mind? Apart from the sense experiences, we also have the mental experience, mental events happening in mental consciousness or being perceived only by mental consciousness, the domain of the mind itself. So now, withdraw your attention from any physical sense experience. Let go of focusing on anything that comes in through the sense doors, but bring all your attention to the mind itself. Dedicate all your attention to gently observing whatever mental events arise in the space of your mind, thoughts, images, memories, whatever it might be. And again, as you did before, without engaging in anything, without trying to control or change anything, just observe the nature of mental events arising and passing. Just watch, observe. And in what happens in the mind, let there just be what momentarily happens in the mind. And whatever arises, whatever comes and goes without any discrimination or without looking for anything. Be very relaxed, very at ease. And whatever comes, just let it be. Without any judgment or discrimination, watch the movement of thoughts taking place in the mind as if they were separate from you, as if you were to watch something on TV. Watch the movement of mind, whatever arises. And see if you can appreciate that we don't have control over what arises in the mind. Thoughts just come. We don't alter them in any way, do we? Just arise. See if you can feel these are not my thoughts. There is no inherent subject here creating them or owning them. They just arise. And watch. Find that sweet spot where you are attentive, clear, open, while at the same time very relaxed. And just continue watching for another 2 minutes in silence. And then slowly, in your own time, you can take a deep breath or two. Slowly bring this meditation to a close, starting to move and opening your eyes. All right. So you see, if you think about it, it's interesting to notice that whatever we experience ever in life is experienced either through our five sense doors, the external world coming in, or it happens in the mind, wherever it is. We Westerners say it's here, Tibetans say it's here, right? Where it abides. It's interesting to notice that whatever you experience from the external world, anything, is experienced through one or multiple of your five sense consciousnesses. That's it. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. External world. And this information, this data, which is gathered from the external world, is then kind of processed in mental consciousness, the sixth mode of main mind. So sometimes the analogy of the hand is useful, right? You have seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, the five sense consciousnesses, gathering the data from the external world, which is all gathered in the palm of the hand, which symbolizes mental consciousness. You know? So how do we experience the external world and then think about it in mental consciousness, so to say? This, of course, depends on our different sense powers, right? How I or you or we as human beings perceive the external world is very, very, very different from a different species, like an animal, say a horse, a blue whale, or a fly. They have different sense organs and therefore different forms of sense consciousness arise, and they experience the environment completely differently, which leads them also to interpret the environment totally differently than we human beings. Yet we say, well, the world how we see it is real, and they just see it differently. You know, we see the real world. Imagine how a horse sees the real world. Well, what is real and what is unreal? What makes our human external environment, how we interpret it, more real than that of a cockroach or an eagle or whatever you have? You know, I heard that we as human beings, I think a butterfly, we as human beings have three color receptors in our eye. Three. I think a butterfly has six or nine, I'm not sure now, but more than us. So, what a butterfly sees with its eye consciousness is so much more grandiose and incredible and mind blowing. No wonder they spent their whole day flying around flowers. You know, it's like, wow, they're so blown away by the firework of colors and shapes. And they spent their whole life just going there because it's the greatest thing ever. Well, due to the dependent arising of their particular senses, right? And how they interpret reality through that. Now, we as human beings is the same, right? It's the sense power, the particular objects, and the consciousness arising from them. This is how reality is formed, really. But where is the inherent this or that apart from this dependent arising that doesn't exist, right? So, for me at least, just to sit and pay attention to the very simple processes of perception one by one kind of allows me to gain some distance between getting involved into interpretation and taking it so seriously, forgetting that it is interpretation, right? It's not something wrong to interpret something, right? We shouldn't fall into the extreme of thinking, I shouldn't interpret anything anymore because it's all conceptual consciousness is all wrong. Conceptual consciousness is not always wrong. It's very often correct and realization. It's mistaken, yes, with respect to its appearing object, because conceptual consciousness thinks something, and we think, I totally think about the real thing, but it's a mental image by way of which we apprehend reality with conceptual consciousness. But what I'm trying to say is conceptual reality and interpretation is useful, obviously. The problem is just that we do not remember that we do actively interpret things. You see? You know, we all kind of indoctrinated into the Pasangika Madhyamika right? Phenomena are empty of inherent existence because they're dependent arising. It's all merely labeled by mind, which I believe is reality. This to understand this really is very, very difficult, right? It's very tough. But just we know that labeled by mind, phenomena are merely designated by mind while they exist. They exist because they're designated by mind, right? It's not that there's nothing there and it's just an imagination. Being merely designated by mind involves existence, valid existence. So it's not a problem to designate something or to interpret something. The problem is we don't know that we actively do it all the time. Nothing wrong with interpreting something that somebody says to you if you don't forget that this is your interpretation of it. Maybe correct, maybe not, though. So that openness needs to be there. And our problem, I think, in some way we can argue why we experience so much problems and so many troubles in our life is because we take our own interpretations as total reality and another person's interpretation as total garbage. And there we go. Anyway, I'm just talking. It's just thoughts. I talked a lot. What do you think? Do you have any questions or any things you would like to, in the last 10 minutes, to add on to this um, talk or to this meditation we did? Please.
Uh, Thank you, Venerable, very much.
Hmm.
I I love this teaching of the Buddha, and so I really appreciate that you spend the time to talk about it and lead us through a meditation that's relevant to it. Um, One of the things that I I struggle with is, the way that you talked about all of this, it seemed like a slow process that we could observe, but I think that a lot of this uh, interpretation happens, within microseconds of us
That's right.
perceiving
Yeah.
something. And so I think at the end, maybe you answered what is my question. My question is, given that it happens too quickly to really stand in the way of it,
Right.
sounded like at the end your advice is um, you can't stop it, but just remember that it's happened, that you've layered something on top of it, or am I wrong? Is there actually a way to stop it? So,
I think yes. I think because for us it is so because it indeed happens in microseconds. It happens so quick. I think Venerable Rubina would use the term our minds are quicker than Google, right? Bam, we see something and woof, all our karmic interpretations, so to say, are there. Not everybody interprets things in the same way, right? It has to do with many different factors. So it goes extremely quick. So we cannot just say, no, I'm not going to interpret something now. We can't do it because our concentration level is too low. I think it seems to me that if you are able to tap, you to practice more and more deeply into concentration states, if you develop states of concentration such as shamatha and beyond, the various, absorptions and in the different in the form and formless realms, right? That's what they talk about, especially, that this is something we can do. Our mind becoming so sharp and so concentrated, so perfectly clear that we eventually might be able in these states to actually see how things unfold because our concentration is so good that we can see it perfectly. I think there are people and beings who can do that. On our level, at my level at least, having no concentration, I can also not do it just like that. Which is why but I still am able to remember it is happening. Interpretation happens here. And to some degree, we can at least prevent ourselves from getting caught up in the interpretation. Okay, the interpretation happens, right? You perceive something. Usually you perceive something, interpretation happens, but you don't know that you interpret. You immediately take it for granted, it's real, and you react and you boom, you go into it. This is how it is, right? And somebody disagrees and says, no, it's not like at all like that, and you get into a conflict maybe. If you perceive and you remember, aha, and you interpret because it's so quick, but you remember, oh, this is my interpretation. Don't get too sucked into this interpretation. Take it cool, stay cool. then there is more space to act within that, right? To not get carried away by often wrong interpretations, but you stay more unbiased. You have more time for equanimity to make decisions. And therefore, attachment and anger and delusions don't really become so strong because you can stay more neutral. That's maybe the first thing we can do. Also, for that, we need a lot of mindfulness and introspection, right? Also, for that, we already need some level of concentration or at least awareness of what's happening in the mind. But so I think that's my answer. Yes, in the beginning, this is where we are and what we train. But then eventually, if we are able to develop more sophisticated states of concentration, we can be more and more sophisticated with even that to a degree where we can, I think, and in beings who have realized subtle impermanence, they can stop right there and then. They see interpretation. And maybe that doesn't even arise then. That's just my thoughts. Mhm. Yeah.
Everything into
Right.
interpretation, or is there some things that could be just, like taste, like for one of the senses, if you eat whatever something and you don't like that thing, or if you eat a steak and the
Mm.
waitress is asking you, "Hey, do you like it?" And I'm like, I'm still working on creating space here before I can
Yeah, exactly.
respond to your question. How does that work? Taste or music or stuff like that?
I mean, everything is an interpretation. I think there we have to be careful. I think this word interpretation, I think for you, right? I mean, you have a particular experience. What is the particular factor that causes you to make a decision between do you like that steak or not, right? I mean, we all know that we can get used to a taste, for example. Right? When I talk about an interpretation, it's like something, a particular taste, something hits your senses here, your tongue consciousness, and a particular consciousness is experienced, is created. To talk about it in the Buddhist philosophical psychological point of view is you have this main mind of tongue consciousness experiencing the taste of a steak. And that's what tongue consciousness does, the main mind. Nothing more, just taste. But with that main mind, you have different mental factors, such as feeling of either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
Right.
So you have a pleasant taste or an unpleasant taste, right? Or a neutral, which basically means neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Okay, so here we are. Now, if you experience something pleasant, what usually happens? I mean, even there you can just pleasant taste. No problem, just pleasantness. No need to follow after it. But we love pleasantness, right? We love it if something is pleasant. We like pleasant experiences and we dislike unpleasant experiences. So if that's the reason why the Buddha, when he talked about the five aggregates, he took feeling and discrimination out. Feeling is something very important because it brings us into all kinds of trouble. Why? Because when a pleasant feeling arises, attachment comes. What is a pleasant feeling? It is a feeling that when you have it, you want to sustain it and for it not to fade. That's what a pleasant experience is. An unpleasant experience is as soon as it's there, you want it to end immediately. You know? So I would say if I eat a steak and there's a pleasant experience, then you interpret maybe that pleasant experience as you can deal with it in different ways, right? You can say, oh, it's unpleasant, but no worries. Or this now I'm coming here Sunday morning, New York City, eating my steak, and this tastes so unpleasant, and you get all caught up with it. Then interpretation of many things starts from there and leads you into various directions. So to kind of get into between the feeling, the experience of the feeling, and the grasping, either pushing it away or wanting more of it. There you can make a gap. This is really, even within the 12 links of dependent origination, that's actually where the Buddha says, here we can work. A feeling arises. If you don't fall into any form of grasping due to interpretation, that's how I use this word for now, in this way, then you don't have to act upon it with an emotional charge, and therefore you don't create karma.
Mhm.
An experience is just an experience, right? Experience happens. But then the action onto that with a particular intention creates new potential, which we don't have to do. And that's just if something unpleasant happens, if you're able to not panic and get into all kinds of, complaints and make a big deal out of it, then no big deal will happen, and you're able to deal with the situation having less problems and less stuff coming up. But it's not easy. But for that, we have to see that space, right? That we have to just notice there is a space, actually. You can get it. It's there. If, it's not impossible. It's something you can do, I think. Hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Ron. Right.
I
Was
think
there a
there's
question?
something in the chat there.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you. Suggestions on mourning old losses of parents, for example, with whom we had troubled relationships, mental suffering. Hmm. Mourning old losses in sense of grief, you mean? Are you still there? iPad 8? Maybe not. I think the big question.
Yeah, I think
Hmm.
she is there. She's just trying to
Sure.
turn on her
Um,
audio.
I don't know if
Hmm.
I can describe it as grief. It's
Uh,
it's a kind of grief, more like regret than grief.
for something that you have or have not done, or another person
Yeah,
has or hasn't done.
yes, yes. Let us say a mutual relationship that was important but failed,
Hmm.
and how to find that distance between what happened and how to live now without carrying that suffering.
Yeah, I think this has to do with how you interpret this situation right now, right? Things have happened. They have happened. We cannot change them anymore. We would if we could, but we have, right? We have acted in certain ways in certain situations, often under the influence of our own delusions, not really knowing how to act and not to act, being overcome by our own emotional difficulties. So we might have acted in ways that were harmful and and the other person also has acted in ways that were harmful, and it has led into a situation which now, looking back, we feel sad about. We regret in that way. Why has it happened like that? Well, if we can be really practical and say, okay, this has happened. I cannot change it. Now, sitting here and feeling sad about this and thinking about all the scenarios of how it could have unfolded if I had only done this or that, or if only that would not have happened, this is something that is never ending and simply not useful at all. Like, this is not useful, right? You have to kind of tell yourself, this is not leading me anywhere. It just keeps me in a state of mental suffering. So, and I've gone through it in all kinds of ways, now I make the decision I do not want to suffer anymore from this. I make the decision, with loving kindness to yourself, giving as a gift to you the opportunity, I would like to not suffer from that anymore. What can I take from this situation now? What can I now do? What can I not do? So then all kinds of things open up, right? Can you still be in contact with that person? I mean, if things happen with people that are still alive, we have an opportunity to speak with them, to apologize, to ask for forgiveness, to express our own forgiveness. We have an opportunity to contact. If that is not possible, we do it in our minds. We can do a spiritual practice. We do it in here. We solve it in here. And then also many things open up, especially when we have regrets of some things we did wrong. The practice of the four opponent powers, right? Of, purification, and then an active development of loving kindness and compassion towards yourself and others. That can be very healing. So I think it has to do with, I really don't like the term to move on. When something happened, we just have to move on. Well, it's not like that. There might be a pain and a scar and something that we carry with us. But this is samsara. Here we are. The Buddha talked about suffering, didn't he? The Buddha talked about there is suffering of loss, of not getting what you want, of having to experience what you don't want. right? Pain is there. If we can accept suffering, then there can be freedom. Suffering is there. Okay. By me going around trying to change it and heal it and make and fix it, well, that I can't. I cannot go back into the past. But from now on, I can act differently as best as I can. And we aim towards the best we can do. Like this, we work, I think. Anyway, it's just my thoughts. I'm not sure. Okay. Maybe one more here in the chat here, Taruna. Thank you so much for the teaching. Can you please suggest some Lojong slogans you mentioned that we can remind ourselves in challenging situations? I mean, the best is if you can actually turn to the 7-Point Mind Training by Geshe Chikawa. The 7-Point Mind Training. There's a very good book by Thubten Jimpa, the translator, or used to be the translator of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but also translated many books of His Holiness into English, Geshe Thubten Jimpa, and he has published this incredible compendium of mind training, having all these amazing texts on mind training translated. It's a big one, a big book, and a bit of a tough read. So because it's a tough read, he also published a thinner one. It's called Essential Mind Training, with essential mind training texts inside. And yes, this is something that I would really recommend to you when you read the 7-Point Mind Training because it also has the commentary by Sejubut Gyaltsen in it. And towards the end of the 7-Point Mind Training section within this book, and I'm sure you probably can also find it online, maybe in Lotsawa translation, the homepage, you can Google it, you check it. Maybe I can write it down for you, the title into this chat, the 7-Point Mind Training. There you find these pith instruction slogans, you know. So there are many of them. And then it's like a feast, a buffet for you, all prepared from 1,000 years ago. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Well, we've gone over our time.
We've gone over time. That's it.
Yes, but one point on that last question. We have invited Thubten Jinpa to give a teaching to Shantideva next year, and so
Fantastic.
we don't know exactly what topic he'll be teaching on, but the people in the audience might stay tuned for that. So thank you all very much for participating.
Thanks so much, everyone.
We really appreciate it, and we do hope you come back to teach us at Shantideva Center. I know
I
you're
would love to. Thank
busy.
you.
You're very, very busy with your studies and your translation work. So thank you very much. Taking a break from your holidays to share with us this lovely talk and meditation. So I thank you very much, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you all too. Thanks for organizing this. And yes, it was very lovely. So see you again.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.